Riya Malhotra looked like success, lived like success, and sold the dream of success to everyone who crossed her path, until $5 million vanished and her perfect life. She arrived in Miami carrying a carefully built identity that looked flawless from the outside. Every detail of her life appeared intentional. Her social media was filled with images of luxury apartments, designer clothes, and rooftop parties overlooking the ocean. She presented herself as an independent woman who had risen from humble beginnings to international success. People admired her confidence and assumed her wealth came from intelligence and hard work. What no one saw was the planning behind the image. She understood how perception controlled trust. She studied successful influencers, business leaders, and wealthy social figures. She copied their habits, their language, and even the timing of their online activity. Each post was designed to send a message of credibility. Expensive settings created the illusion of power, while subtle mentions of struggle made her seem relatable. She knew that appearing rich was more important than actually being rich. The illusion opened doors that money alone could not. Private investors, financial advisors, and international contacts responded quickly to her presence. She learned how to listen carefully and mirror the expectations of the people she met. This allowed her to appear knowledgeable without revealing real details. Her background story was intentionally vague. It changed slightly depending on who was listening, but never enough to raise suspicion. She avoided emotional connections and focused on results, numbers, and future opportunities. People trusted her because she never seemed desperate or aggressive. Behind closed doors, her life was quiet and controlled. She spent hours organizing documents, creating digital records, and rehearsing explanations. Every move was calculated. Miami was not chosen by accident. It was a place associated with wealth, speed, and international business. In that environment, questions were rare and ambition was respected. After establishing her image in Miami, she turned her attention north. Canada offered something she needed more than attention: stability and trust. Investors there were known for caution, but also for believing in structured opportunities backed by strong paperwork. She studied the Canadian financial environment carefully, learning how cross-border investments worked and where oversight moved slowly. She positioned herself as a bridge between markets. Miami, she claimed, was only her base. Her real strength was access. She hinted at connections in mining, gold trading, and luxury real estate that operated quietly outside public listings. These opportunities were presented as exclusive, available only to those willing to move quickly and discreetly. Her approach was subtle. She never rushed investors. Instead, she shared small pieces of information over time. Financial projections were detailed, but not overwhelming. Registration documents appeared legitimate, complete with professional formatting and international seals. Everything suggested a clean, well-organized operation. She focused on individuals rather than institutions. Wealthy professionals, retired executives, and private investors were easier to convince. Many were looking to diversify outside traditional markets. She offered them security through structure, not emotion. Returns were described as realistic, not exaggerated, which made them believable. Money entered slowly at first. Small investments were encouraged to test the system. Early returns arrived exactly on schedule, reinforcing trust. Positive results spread quietly among private circles. Each new investor increased the credibility of the operation without her needing to promote it openly. As confidence grew, so did the amounts. Funds were wired to accounts linked to her companies. Every transaction seemed justified by contracts, invoices, and future delivery timelines. No alarms were triggered. By the time larger sums were transferred, once the money began flowing steadily, the structure of the operation changed completely. What looked like a simple investment system became a complex network designed to hide movement and ownership. Funds arriving from Canada were never left untouched for long. Within hours, they were broken into smaller amounts and transferred through multiple accounts across different countries. Each transfer had a purpose. Some accounts were registered under business names that appeared connected to gold trading or property management. Others were linked to consulting firms that existed only on paper. These layers made it difficult for anyone to see where the money truly ended up. By the time it reached its final destination, it no longer resembled the original investment. To maintain confidence, she allowed controlled profits to be sent back. These early payouts were carefully calculated. They were just enough to confirm legitimacy, but small enough to avoid real loss. Investors believed the system was working exactly as promised. This delayed suspicion and encouraged reinvestment. Behind the scenes, the scale of the deception grew larger. Fake shipping records suggested gold was being transported. Altered invoices showed progress in real estate projects that did not exist. Digital files were stored on secure servers and updated regularly to appear active. Everything was designed to survive a casual review. As months passed, communication slowly decreased. Responses took longer. Explanations became more technical. Delays were blamed on international regulations and market conditions. These reasons sounded reasonable and familiar, especially to investors used to complex systems. Eventually, payments stopped. Access to portals was restricted. Emails bounced back. Phone numbers were no longer active. By the time investors realized something was wrong, the structure had already collapsed by design. The money had not vanished. The first sign of trouble did not come from the victims, but from a routine review inside a Canadian financial institution. A compliance analyst noticed that several large transfers connected to the same foreign-linked companies did not align with their stated business activities. The explanations attached to the transactions were polished, yet something felt inconsistent. The flow of money was too clean, too controlled, and strangely repetitive. The accounts involved showed patterns that did not match normal investment behavior. Funds arrived in large amounts and left quickly, often moving overseas within hours. Profits claimed by investors did not reflect real market data tied to gold or property trends. These details were small on their own, but together they formed a quiet warning sign. The bank did not alert investors. Instead, it began a silent internal review. Historical records were pulled, and transaction timelines were rebuilt. Analysts compared paperwork with digital behavior, including login locations and account access times. Some data did not match the official story being presented. This information was passed discreetly to financial authorities. At first, the case was treated as a possible regulatory issue rather than a crime. Cross-border cases were slow, and the companies involved appeared legitimate on paper. There was no immediate urgency. Meanwhile, investors grew uneasy. Responses from Miami became rare. Reports stopped updating. The confidence that once defined the operation began to fade. Still, many believed delays were temporary. What no one realized was that the investigation had already begun to grow quietly. Authorities started mapping connections between companies, accounts, and individuals. Early findings suggested coordination rather than mismanagement. While she continued living freely, enjoying the belief that she was untouchable, a file with her name slowly expanded. Her downfall did not begin with a dramatic event, but with a moment of carelessness. After months of operating in isolation, she started building a new business structure to replace the old one. In doing so, she reused a digital identity she believed was forgotten. The email address had once been linked to an earlier company and had quietly remained archived in financial databases. When the new registration appeared, automated systems connected it to older records. What had once looked like separate businesses suddenly formed a single chain. Investigators saw patterns emerge that had been invisible before. Accounts, domain names, and payment routes now pointed in the same direction. At the same time, pressure from the past resurfaced. A former associate, feeling abandoned and unpaid, submitted anonymous material to authorities. The documents included internal spreadsheets, altered audits, and original versions of contracts that had been edited before being sent to investors. These files revealed how financial reports were manufactured rather than recorded. The evidence changed everything. What was once suspected as poor oversight now appeared as deliberate deception. Authorities upgraded the case, bringing in specialized fraud units. The focus shifted from recovering losses to proving intent and structure. Her operation was no longer viewed as a failed investment. It was recognized as a coordinated scheme designed to mislead. Timelines were reconstructed, showing how each stage was planned. Investigators could now see when money was meant to disappear and when trust was intentionally reinforced. She remained unaware of the shift. Confident in her escape, she continued spending freely, believing her past was safely buried. What she did not know was that the smallest digital trace had reopened everything. That single mistake allowed investigators to see the full picture for the first time. From that moment, the outcome was no longer uncertain. With the structure finally visible, investigators began rebuilding the entire operation piece by piece. They followed digital traces left behind over several years, treating each one as a fragment of a much larger puzzle. Old website registrations revealed hosting locations and update schedules. Archived versions of business pages showed promises that had quietly changed over time. Financial experts analyzed transaction paths across multiple countries. Even though the money had been split and rerouted, timing patterns exposed coordination. Transfers often followed the same sequence within minutes, suggesting automation rather than independent business activity. This allowed authorities to predict where funds had gone next, even when account names differed. Technical teams examined access logs tied to investor portals. Login records showed repeated connections from the same regions, regardless of which company was being accessed. Device fingerprints linked activities that were meant to appear unrelated. Slowly, her digital shadow became clear. International cooperation accelerated the process. Canadian agencies shared findings with U.S. counterparts. Data requests crossed borders, unlocking bank records, travel histories, and luxury purchase information. Each new record added depth to the case and confirmed earlier suspicions. What made the investigation powerful was patience. No move was rushed. Authorities allowed her to continue her routine while they gathered proof. Surveillance confirmed spending patterns that matched missing funds. Assets were quietly identified, mapped, and prepared for seizure. She believed silence meant safety. The absence of contact from Canada reassured her that the case had faded. In reality, the silence was intentional. Investigators wanted the evidence to be complete before acting. By the time her name officially appeared on coordinated watch lists, the case was no longer about suspicion. It was about timing. The collapse came suddenly, without warning or spectacle. One morning, access to her accounts disappeared. Card declined. Transfers failed. What she first assumed was a technical issue quickly spread across every financial channel she controlled. The flow of money that had powered her lifestyle stopped completely. At the same time, properties tied to her shell companies were quietly secured. Legal notices were filed, and restrictions were placed before any public action was taken. Luxury items purchased through layered transactions were identified and flagged. The assets that once symbolized success were now evidence. Surveillance confirmed her movements as the situation unfolded. Investigators documented how her routine changed when control slipped away. Travel plans were interrupted. New accounts could not be opened. Attempts to shift remaining funds failed as international holds activated within minutes. She tried to stay invisible, avoiding attention and limiting communication. But the system she had relied on for years had turned against her. Every previous safeguard was now a weakness. The complexity that once protected her made the collapse faster and more complete. Behind the scenes, warrants were finalized and approved. Authorities moved only when every legal threshold had been met. When action came, it was precise and final. There was no escape route left to use. What remained was the realization that the illusion was over. The confidence that had carried her across borders meant nothing against coordinated enforcement. The empire she believed was untouchable dissolved without confrontation. By the end of the day, her identity had changed. She was no longer a figure of influence or mystery. She was a confirmed subject of one of the largest cross-border fraud cases connected to Canadian investors. The story she controlled for years ended in complete silence. The final stage unfolded long after the money stopped moving and the headlines faded. Investigators focused on rebuilding what had been damaged rather than chasing attention. Every recovered asset was documented, traced, and assigned back to its origin. The process was slow, but it was deliberate. Authorities understood that justice in financial crime depended on precision, not speed. International cooperation proved essential. Canadian and U.S. agencies coordinated to untangle legal barriers that once protected her. Courts reviewed years of records, confirming how deception had been layered across borders. What began as suspicion was now supported by undeniable proof. The story she told investors was formally replaced with the truth. For the victims, closure did not come easily. Many had trusted the system, not a person. Seeing funds partially recovered restored some confidence, but the impact remained deep. Investigators provided transparency, explaining how the fraud operated and why it lasted so long. This clarity mattered as much as the money itself. The case became a reference point for future enforcement. Financial institutions updated monitoring systems using lessons from the investigation. Patterns once considered harmless were now recognized as early warning signs. Her methods, once hidden, were studied to prevent repetition. She faded from public view, no longer able to control the narrative. What remained was a record that could not be edited or erased. Her rise and fall became a cautionary example of how image can overpower truth and how technology eventually restores balance. In the end, justice did not arrive with drama. It arrived through files, data, and cooperation. The crime crossed borders, but accountability followed. She believed she had rewritten her destiny. Instead, it was rewritten by patience, evidence, and a system she underestimated.